Of all the betrayals I've seen across that stage over the years, the ones born from love, the ones that fester inside a family, they cut the deepest. They're not clean wounds. They're a sickness in the bone, a poison that rewrites history and leaves you wondering if anything you ever knew was real. And this one was a masterclass in deception, not by a stranger behind a keyboard 1,000 miles away, but by the one person in the world who shared your blood, your childhood, your secrets. The person sleeping in the next room, I first met them backstage, Jessica and Amanda. The labels had already been assigned by the time they got to me. Amanda was the victim, shattered and fragile, her eyes holding this profound, swimming confusion. You could see she was replaying her life, looking for clues she'd missed. For the moment, the script had been flipped without her knowing. Every memory was now tainted. Every shared secret, every late-night phone call was now part of a grand, cruel illusion. She wasn't just heartbroken over a man who didn't exist. She was mourning the sister she thought she had. Then there was Jessica. She was the villain, the monster, the sociopath. Those were the words people were using. She walked into the room with a wall of defensiveness so thick you could have bounced a bowling ball off it. Her arms were crossed, her jaw was set, and her eyes dared you to judge her. It's a look I know well. It's the look of someone who has decided the best defense is a furious offense. It's a preemptive strike against the pain they know is coming, the condemnation they feel they deserve. But underneath that armor, I saw something else. It wasn't the cold, calculating emptiness of a true sociopath. It was fear, a deep, abyssal fear. She wasn't afraid of me. She was terrified of the truth, her own truth. The central problem, on paper, was simple. For 7 years, Jessica had catfished her own sister, Amanda. She had created a fictional online persona, a man named Mark, and had cultivated a deep, romantic, and emotional relationship between this fabrication and her sister. 7 years. Think about that. That's not a prank that got out of hand. That's not a momentary lapse in judgment. That's a full-time job. It's a level of dedication and psychological commitment that is staggering. It requires meticulous planning, a compartmentalization of self that is profoundly disturbing. She had been both sister and lover, confidant and deceiver all at once. This case stuck with me because the why was so much more complex than simple malice. People wanted to believe Jessica did it because she was evil, because it's easier that way. If she's just a monster, we can put her in a box, label it, and feel safe. But the truth is rarely that simple. Monsters are made, not born. And I knew my job wasn't just to expose the lie. That was the easy part. My job was to excavate the wound that made the lie necessary in the first place. What was the payoff for Jessica? What void in her own life was so gaping that she had to fill it by creating a fantasy life for her sister, a life in which she secretly was the star? I sat with them both before the show, separately. Amanda's story was one of pure, unadulterated pain. He was my best friend, Dr. Phil, she told me, tears streaming down her face. He knew everything about me. We talked every single day. He got me through Mom's illness. He helped me decide to go back to school. And the whole time, it was her listening, typing, lying. The betrayal was twofold. She had lost the man she loved, and in the very same moment, she had lost the sister she trusted. The two most important relationships in her life vaporized Jessica's pre-interview was a different story. It was a tangle of justifications, blame shifting, and minimization. It started as a joke, she'd say. I never thought it would go this far. She was so naive, she believed anything. But these are just scripts. They're the lines people write for themselves to make their actions palatable, to avoid looking at the ugliness of their own motivations. I had to get past the script. I needed to understand the author. Because a 7-year lie isn't a joke. It's a novel, it's an epic tragedy. And Jessica was its author, its protagonist, and its primary victim, whether she knew it or not. The hole she had been digging wasn't for her sister, it was for herself, and she'd been living at the bottom of it for a very long time. When someone tells you a lie of this magnitude started as a joke, what they're really telling you is that they don't have the emotional courage to face the truth of its origin. A joke has a punchline. This had a 7-year fuse. To understand the bomb, you have to go back to who lit it and why. And with Jessica and Amanda, their history was the kindling. You see this pattern in families all the time. Children get assigned roles, and they play them so well for so long, they forget they're even wearing a costume. Amanda was the pretty one, the charmer, the one everything came easy to. Boys liked her, teachers liked her. She had a radiance that drew people in. That was her role, and she played it well. Jessica was the responsible one, the smart one, the one who got things done. These sound like compliments, don't they? But often, when a child is labeled the responsible one, what it really means is they're the one who isn't getting recognized for anything else. It means they're the caretaker, the planner, the invisible engine that makes the family run while the other shinier parts get all the attention. From a young age, Jessica learned that her value was in her utility, not her identity. She watched Amanda float through life on a cloud of effortless adoration while she was on the ground, doing the work, feeling perpetually overlooked. This isn't to say their parents were malicious. Most parents aren't. But they were human, and they reinforced these roles without even realizing it. It would be, Amanda, you look so lovely in that dress, and Jessica, thank you for setting the table. One gets praise for who she is, the other for what she does. Do that for 18 years, and you create a profound imbalance of self-worth. Amanda's identity was validated from the outside in. Jessica's was based on a quiet, simmering resentment and the desperate belief that if she just worked harder, did more, maybe one day someone would see her. So when the Mark persona was born, it wasn't out of thin air, it was a direct response to this lifelong dynamic. It happened, as these things often do, during a moment of peak vulnerability for both of them. Amanda was going through a tough breakup, feeling lost and lonely. Jessica was, as usual, in the background, feeling invisible. She saw her sister's pain, but she also saw an opportunity. Not a malicious one, not at first. In her mind, it was twistedly altruistic. She thought, I know what she needs to hear. I know how to make her feel better. Because Jessica had been studying Amanda her entire life. She knew her sister's hopes, fears, and emotional triggers better than anyone. So she created a profile, Mark. He wasn't some supermodel or a billionaire. That would have been too obvious. The genius of the deception was in its subtlety. Mark was just a regular guy, kind, attentive, a good listener. He was everything Jessica was, but in a package Amanda would finally accept. He was the perfect man because he was custom built from the blueprints of Amanda's soul, drawn by the person who knew her best. And when Amanda took the bait, when she started pouring her heart out to Mark, Jessica got a payoff she had been craving her entire life. For the first time, she was the most important person in her sister's world. Not as Jessica, the plain, responsible sister, but as Mark, the perfect, understanding soulmate. Amanda would say things to Mark she would never say to Jessica. You're the only one who really gets me. I can tell you anything. Every one of those sentences was a direct injection of the validation and intimacy Jessica felt she had been denied. It became a powerful, intoxicating drug. This is where the behavior becomes addictive. It wasn't about the lie itself, it was about the feeling the lie produced. She was living vicariously through this creation. Mark got to be the hero. He got to be the romantic lead. And Jessica, the puppeteer, got to feel every ounce of the adoration and love directed at her creation. It was a counterfeit fulfillment, but when you're starving, you don't care if the bread is real. The tragic part is that she was giving her sister genuine emotional support. The advice was sound, the empathy was real, it was all coming from Jessica. But she had created a delivery system for her own best qualities that required her to be invisible. She was simultaneously the source of her sister's greatest comfort and her most profound deception. The lie grew a life of its own. It had to. A 7-year relationship requires a backstory, a job, friends, a history. Jessica had to build an entire fictional universe and police its borders 24/7. The escalation began subtly. Amanda would say, I want to talk to him on the phone. So Jessica had to use a voice-altering app. Then, I want a video chat. So Mark's webcam was perpetually broken. Then came the big one. I want to meet him. This is where the excuses became more and more elaborate. Mark was working on an oil rig. He was deployed overseas. His mother was sick. Each new demand from Amanda required a more complex lie from Jessica. The mental energy required to keep that afloat is immense. It's a house of cards in a hurricane. She was living in a constant state of low-grade panic, terrified that one wrong move, one slip of the tongue, would bring the entire thing crashing down. She was a prisoner in a jail of her own design, and the only way out was to confess and destroy the one person she claimed she was trying to protect. The pressure cooker was bound to explode. It always does. You can't maintain a lie of that complexity and emotional weight indefinitely. The stress begins to leak out sideways. For Jessica, it manifested as control. As Mark, she had this incredible power over her sister's emotional state. If Amanda was thinking of dating someone in the real world, Mark would suddenly have a crisis. He'd become distant or create some drama that would pull Amanda's focus right back to him. Jessica wasn't just catfishing her sister, she was sabotaging her sister's real life to protect the fantasy one. This is a critical psychological turning point. The initial, perhaps misguided motive of helping her sister had morphed into something much darker. It was about possession. Jessica couldn't stand the thought of Amanda finding happiness with a real man, because that would mean the end of Mark. And the end of Mark meant the end of Jessica's secret source of validation. The counterfeit love she received as Mark was so much more potent than the familial love she got as Jessica that she became willing to do anything to protect it. She was actively isolating her sister from real-world opportunities for love, all while posing as her greatest emotional support. It's a level of manipulation that is profoundly damaging. The family started to notice things were off. Their mother, their father, close friends, they would all ask Amanda, when are we going to meet this guy? It's been years. The questions grew more pointed, the skepticism more obvious. This external pressure funneled directly to Amanda, who in turn funneled it to Mark. My family thinks you're not real, she'd type, desperate for reassurance. And Jessica, as Mark, would have to perform the most breathtaking emotional gymnastics. She'd get angry, offended. How can you not trust me after everything we've been through? She would turn Amanda's legitimate doubts into a question of her loyalty, making Amanda feel guilty for even asking. This is classic blame shifting. The deceiver paints the victim as the one who is being unreasonable or untrusting. The escalation hit a fever pitch when their mother got sick, really sick. It was a time when the family needed to pull together to be transparent and authentic with one another. But Jessica was living a double life. Amanda would spend hours on the phone with their mom at the hospital and then spend hours online crying to Mark, telling him every detail. Mark became her rock. He offered the perfect words of comfort, the most insightful advice, and all of it was coming from Jessica, who was sitting in the same house, watching her sister grieve, listening to her own words being repeated back to her. Mark said that maybe we should try talking to this specialist. Mark thinks I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself too. Imagine the psychological torment of that. To be the author of your sister's comfort, but to receive none of the credit. To be a ghost in your own family's tragedy. The resentment in Jessica must have been building to an unbearable level. She was doing all the emotional heavy lifting, but her creation was getting all the glory. At the same time, the lie was now entangled with their mother's mortality. Amanda had made promises. You have to hold on, Mom. You have to meet Mark. The stakes were no longer just about a broken heart. They were about a dying mother's final wish. The breaking point came, as it often does, from a simple mistake, a technological slip-up. Jessica had been using a specific photo for Mark's profile, one she'd pulled from an obscure social media account years ago. A friend of Amanda's was scrolling through the internet one day and saw the same photo on a company's website. It was a stock photo model from a different country. The friend sent it to Amanda with a simple message. Hey, isn't this your boyfriend, Mark? And just like that, the house of cards collapsed. Amanda described that moment to me as the world tilting on its axis. It wasn't just that the photo was fake. It was the realization that if the photo was fake, everything could be fake. The oil rig, the broken webcam, the sick mother, the 7 years of conversations. She didn't confront Jessica at first. She went into detective mode. She started cross-referencing things Mark had said, things that only someone in the house would know. The time the power went out, the name of their childhood dog that had died, the little intimate details that Mark knew, not because he was her soulmate, but because she was listening from the next room. The confrontation between them wasn't a single explosive event. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling. Amanda started asking Jessica questions, testing her. She'd mentioned something she told Mark and watched Jessica's face for a flicker of recognition. The paranoia and suspicion in that house must have been suffocating. Finally, Amanda couldn't take it anymore. She sat Jessica down with her laptop open to the stock photo models page and just said, "Who is he?" Jessica's first instinct was to lie, to double down. She tried to create a story about how Mark had been lying to her too, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The walls were closing in, and in that moment, with nowhere left to run, the confession finally came out. Not in a rush, but in a quiet, broken admission. It's me. Those 2 words detonated a bomb in the middle of their family, and the fallout is what brought them to my stage. By the time I saw them, they weren't just 2 sisters with a problem. They were survivors of a psychological war, and neither of them knew if the relationship was salvageable. When they finally sat on that stage, across from me, the air was thick with a silence that screamed louder than any argument. On one side, you had Amanda, who looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and hastily glued back together. The cracks were visible, her entire reality had been dismantled, and she was adrift. On the other side, Jessica was a fortress, Her body language was pure defiance, arms crossed, legs crossed, chin up. It was a physical manifestation of her emotional state, locked down. She was there physically, but she was not going to give an inch emotionally if she could help it. My job in that moment is not to be a referee, it's to be a translator. I have to translate Amanda's raw, chaotic pain into something Jessica can actually hear. And I have to translate Jessica's defensive, armored silence into the language of fear and shame that it truly represents. I started with Amanda letting her tell the story in her own words. It's crucial that the victim gets to define the injury first. As she spoke, the reality of the 7-year deception settled over the audience. You could feel the collective gasp. People hear catfish and they think of some lonely person being duped for money. This was different. This was psychological incest. It was a violation of the most sacred trust there is. Amanda's pain wasn't just about a fake boyfriend, it was about her own identity. Who was I talking to for 7 years? She asked, her voice cracking. When I was telling him my deepest secrets, was I talking to my sister? Or was I talking to a monster she invented? Did she laugh at me? Did she feel contempt for me when I cried to him about my insecurities? These are the questions that haunt you. The deception poisons the past. Every memory is now suspect. Was that genuine sympathy, or was it a puppeteer collecting data? When I turned to Jessica, the wall went up even higher. Her initial responses were a torrent of deflection and minimization. I already said I was sorry. I don't know why everyone is making such a big deal out of this. She needs to just get over it. This is a common tactic. When the shame is too great to bear, the perpetrator attacks the victim's reaction to the crime rather than the crime itself. They try to reframe the narrative to be about the other person's overreaction. I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to dismantle that wall brick by brick. I said to her, Jessica, let's be very clear. You don't get to dictate the terms of her grief. You don't get to tell her how to feel about a 7-year lie that you architected. You forfeited that right. Right now, your only job is to listen. She stared back at me, her jaw tight. This is the critical moment in a confrontation. It's the pivot point. Either she was going to shut down completely and we'd get nowhere, or we were going to break through. I had to bypass the intellectual defenses and go straight for the emotional core. Let's talk about the payoff, Jessica. I said, my tone shifting from confrontational to analytical. This wasn't about a joke. A joke lasts 30 seconds. This was a 7-year full-time commitment. It took work. It took planning. It took immense energy. You don't do that for no reason. You were getting something out of this. What was it? What did Mark give you that Jessica couldn't get? That was the question that unlocked the door. Her tough exterior began to tremble. Her eyes filled with tears. She was desperately trying to hold back because the truth was, Mark got everything Jessica ever wanted. He was heard. He was valued. He was loved unconditionally. He was the center of Amanda's world. She never listened to me, Jessica finally whispered, the words catching in her throat. Anything I said, it went in one ear and out the other. I'd give her advice and she'd ignore it. But when he said the exact same thing, it was gospel. It was brilliant. And there it was, the heart of it all. It was never really about hurting Amanda. It was about a desperate pathological need to be seen, to be validated. She created a mask because she believed the face underneath was worthless. She felt so invisible as herself that she had to invent a whole nother person just to feel like she existed. This was the breakthrough. It wasn't an excuse for her behavior, not by a long shot, but it was an explanation. It moved her from the box labeled monster into the box labeled profoundly wounded human being. And that's a place you can start to heal from. I turned back to Amanda. Did you hear what she just said? I asked. She's not saying it's your fault, but she is telling you that she felt so completely invisible to you that she had to create a fantasy to get your attention. This is a hard truth for a victim to hear. It's confusing. How can you be both the victim of a horrible deception and at the same time be told you contributed to the dynamic that created it? But this is the reality of family systems. It's never just one person's fault. Amanda had to confront her part in it, not her part in the lie, but her part in the sisterly dynamic where she had, perhaps unintentionally, made Jessica feel secondary her entire life. She had been so caught up in her own world, her own radiance, that she had never stopped to see the person in the shadows beside her. The tears that came then were different from both of them. Amanda's were no longer just tears of betrayal. They were mingled with a dawning, horrified empathy. Jessica's were no longer tears of defiance. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grief for the life she had wasted and the pain she had caused. For the first time on that stage, they weren't victim and villain. They were just two sisters sitting in the wreckage of their lives, finally seeing each other for who they really were. That moment of raw, unscripted emotion on stage is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the real work. A breakthrough is not a cure, it's the diagnosis. It's the moment the patient finally admits they're sick. Now comes the long, grueling treatment. What happens after the lights go down and the audience goes home is what truly defines the outcome. For Jessica and Amanda, the path forward was never going to be simple. Trust isn't a switch you can just flip back on. It's a foundation that has been pulverized, and you have to rebuild it one grain of sand at a time. We arranged for intensive therapy for both of them, separately and together. This was non-negotiable. Jessica had to address the cavernous issues of self-worth that led her to create the Mark persona in the first place. Her identity was so enmeshed with this fabrication that she had to figure out who Jessica even was without him. For 7 years, her primary source of validation had come from a lie. Taking that away is like taking away a drug from an addict. There's withdrawal, there's a void. She had to learn how to generate self-esteem from within, not from the reflection she saw in her sister's eyes. This meant confronting the lifelong narrative that she was the responsible one, the less than one, and starting to build a new story for herself based on her own merits, talents, and desires. Her individual therapy was about deconstructing the lie. Why did she feel the need to be the hero in her sister's life? What was she so afraid would happen if she was just herself? We had to trace that feeling of invisibility all the way back to their childhood, to those small, seemingly insignificant moments that had calcified into a core belief of her own inadequacy. She had to grieve the loss of Mark, which sounds perverse, but it's a necessary step. He was a part of her. He was the part of her that was confident, that was listened to, that was loved. She had to integrate those parts into her own identity as Jessica to realize she didn't need a mask to be those things. For Amanda, the healing process was about rebuilding her ability to trust, not just her sister, but her own judgment. Her perception of reality had been so thoroughly manipulated that she was constantly second-guessing herself. Was that person being nice, or were they manipulating her? Was that a genuine compliment, or was it a lie? Her emotional GPS was broken. She had to learn to trust her gut again, to believe in her own perceptions after being gaslit for nearly a decade. Her therapy focused on processing the trauma of the betrayal. It's a unique kind of grief. She was mourning a man who never existed and a sister she thought she knew. It's an incredibly lonely place to be. She had to work through the anger, the rage, the profound sadness. She had every right to be furious, and she needed a safe space to express that fury without being told she needed to get over it. Part of her healing also involved looking at her own role in their dynamic. Not to take blame for the catfishing, but to understand how she may have inadvertently contributed to her sister's feelings of being unseen. It was a painful self-reflection, realizing that in her own orbit, she may not have made enough space for her sister to shine. Their joint therapy sessions were the most difficult. At first, they were brutal. Amanda would unload her pain and anger, and Jessica, for the first time, had to sit there and take it. No justifications, no deflections, no but you. She had to learn to absorb the consequences of her actions, to witness the depth of the wound she had inflicted. This is a critical part of making amends. It's not just about saying, "I'm sorry," it's about demonstrating that you understand what you are sorry for. You have to be willing to sit in the fire of the other person's pain. There were many times when it seemed like it wouldn't work. Amanda would say, "I look at you and I see him. I hear your voice and I hear his lies." Jessica would shut down, overwhelmed by the guilt and shame, retreating back into her fortress. The therapist's job was to keep them in the room, to keep them talking, to move them from accusation to communication. Instead of, "You lied to me for 7 years," it had to become, "When I learned about the lie, I felt shattered and worthless." Instead of, "You never saw me," it had to become, "I was in so much pain from feeling invisible that I made a terrible choice." The change was incremental. It wasn't a Hollywood movie ending where they have a big, tearful hug and all is forgiven. It was quieter, more realistic. It was a phone call where Amanda shared a small piece of good news and Jessica just listened without offering advice as Mark would have. It was Jessica sharing something she was struggling with in her own life, being vulnerable as herself for the first time. It was the slow, awkward process of getting to know each other again as two 30-something women, not as the roles they had played since they were children. They were learning to build a new relationship, one based on a brutal, painful honesty. The old one, the one based on secrets and illusions, had to die completely for a new one to have any chance of being born. It was an outcome of profound growth, but it was a growth that came from burning the old world to the ground. The scars would always be there, a reminder of the fire, but they were finally walking out of the ashes. The outcome of a story like this is never a neat bow. You don't just fix a 7-year betrayal and go back to having Sunday dinner. The truth is, some things, once broken, can never be put back together in the same way. The goal isn't to restore the old relationship. That relationship was built on a flawed, toxic foundation. The goal is to see if a new, more authentic one can be built from the rubble. And that's a choice both parties have to make every single day. Months after the show, I followed up with them. It's something I always do. The stage is a catalyst, but life is the real test. What I found was not a fairy tale, but something far more valuable, a fragile, difficult, and honest reality. The dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. The old roles of the pretty one and the responsible one had been incinerated in the confrontation. What was left were two women, stripped bare of their lifelong labels, forced to look at each other and themselves in a new light. Amanda had made the difficult decision to move out. She needed physical space to create emotional space. She told me, "I realized I couldn't heal in the same environment where I was hurt. Every time I walked past her bedroom, I would think about Mark. I needed to build a life that was mine, completely separate from her, before I could even consider letting her back into it. This was an incredibly healthy step. It was an act of self-preservation, of drawing a boundary that was firm but not punitive. She was taking control of her own narrative, no longer a passive victim but an active agent in her own recovery. She was dating cautiously. She was learning to trust her own instincts, to listen to that inner voice that Jessica's deception had silenced for so long. She was, in essence, finding her own footing on solid ground after years of walking on a floor she didn't know was made of glass. Jessica, on the other hand, was going through her own lonely transformation. When Amanda moved out, Jessica was confronted with an echoing silence. The house was no longer filled with the drama and intrigue of her double life. She was left alone with herself, with the unvarnished truth of who she was, and she had to learn to be okay with that person. Her therapy continued, and it was hard. She had to face the deep-seated jealousy and insecurity that had fueled her actions. She told me something profound. She said, "For years, I thought I wanted to be Amanda. I wanted her life, her easy charm. But after all this, I realized I don't want to be her. I just want to be a version of me that I don't have to apologize for." That is the essence of growth. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about shedding the skins you've worn for others and finding comfort in your own. She was learning to find validation in her own accomplishments, in her work, in her own friendships. She was learning to use her voice, her actual voice, not the disguised one of a fictional man, to ask for what she needed. She was beginning to understand that her value wasn't in what she did for others, but simply in who she was. Their communication was stilted at first. It was all text and short, awkward phone calls. But they kept at it, guided by their therapist. They started with safe topics, the weather, a show on TV. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to rebuild. The first real sign of a thaw was when their mother had a health scare. This time, there was no Mark. There was just Amanda calling Jessica, crying and scared. And there was just Jessica listening and offering comfort as herself. It was a simple, human moment, but for them, it was monumental. It was the first brick laid in the foundation of a new relationship. This isn't a story of complete forgiveness. I don't know if Amanda will ever fully, 100% trust Jessica again. That scar is deep, and it will likely always be a part of their story. To expect otherwise would be unrealistic. The outcome wasn't forgiveness in the sense of erasing the past. It was acceptance. Amanda had to accept the reality of what her sister had done and the profound pain it caused. And Jessica had to accept the consequences of her actions, understanding that she had permanently altered their relationship and that she would have to live with that. The outcome here is one of maturity. It's the sober recognition that love and family are not simple. They are complicated, messy, and sometimes incredibly painful. But for those willing to do the excruciating work of facing the truth, of taking accountability, and of rebuilding from a place of brutal honesty, there is a path forward. It's not the easy, sunlit path they were on before, the one that was a lie. It's a harder, steeper path, but it's real. And in the end, a difficult truth is always better than a comforting lie. They are no longer the victim and the villain. They are just Jessica and Amanda, two sisters learning to walk that new path, one hesitant, honest step at a time,